Okay, before I get started, I'm just kind of curious about who you guys are. So how many of you here are students, journalists, defenders, software developers, pen testers, malware research? Okay, all right, cool. Well, I'm a defender, and I tend to defend big systems with lots of users who are also customers. And one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is, and that I've been talking with other folks about lately, is how much security is enough? When am I done? How much do I need to invest to make sure that my system is secure enough? And there are a lot of analogies that I've heard people use to help them come up with an answer to it. Maybe you invest enough to be compliant, or you invest enough to not be anonymous next target, or you invest enough that script kiddies won't bring you down. Or one that actually Josh mentioned in his keynote, you invest enough so that you are not the most secure. You don't have perfect security, but you have more security than the person next to you. And I've been thinking a lot about that and thinking that makes a lot of assumptions about what attackers want and doesn't sort of play out given what our experience tells us about security, which is that if you have weak points in your system, you can be sure that they will be exploited. But that doesn't mean that additional layers of security are really going to give you that additional layer of protection. Better analogies might come from someplace like game theory, because there's a competitive aspect associated with defending. There's also a never-ending aspect associated with defending. If any of you work in defense, you know what I mean. So, okay. So I thought, well, why don't we actually look to game theory and see if there's any analogies or learnings that we can take from that we can use into deploying our own defense systems. So what we're going to do is actually go over a few of the key economic concepts we need to sort of construct security issues as games, and then figure out how to actually design defenses that would give us a shot at winning. Okay, so the first thing to take in consideration in economic theory is utility theory. Have any of you taken econ? Do you know what utility theory is? Okay, so utility is basically a measure of a satisfaction that you get from consuming a good. So in this case, we might say, what's the attacker's utility? Like, what are they going after? What is their intent? What do they want? Do they want to crash your system? Do they want your sensitive data? There's some kind of benefit that they're going to get out of conducting an attack, whether it is, you know, just sort of mental, they were able to get through a challenge, or whether it's actually financial. They were able to steal credit card details that they used to buy big screen TVs. So you really want to understand the benefit someone might get, because you also have a benefit associated with a well-defended system and a cost. And just like you have to balance cost and benefit, so too does your attacker. And this is how we sort of construct things as games. Externalities is basically a concept that suggests that not all of the cost or benefit is necessarily put on the participants in the exchange. And so the classic example of that is pollution as an externality. The public bears a cost from increased manufacturing, even if the manufacturer, the producer of the goods, and the consumer of the goods come to a common decision about price and pricing and consuming the good. Information security. Has anyone ever heard of the InfoSec market being described as a market for lemons? This is a concept that Schneier wrote an article about, and Chris Nickerson has talked about a little bit, which is this idea that you don't always know what you're getting. And that's what information asymmetries are. Sometimes you know things that your competitors or that folks who you are engaged in exchange with don't know. And that can factor into how you estimate what is a good price to pay for something, or how you estimate how to price a good. And in order to sort of get around some of this, there's the concept of signaling. How do you, without directly sharing information, signal back to the market that something is worth more or less based on the information you have that you can't necessarily share with all of the participants in the exchange? And the last thing The last economic concept that I think is critical to designing defenses is the concept of marginal cost. That is, it costs you something to do something or to produce something. How much does that next unit cost? The reason why this is important in information security is because a lot of defense and offense comes from automation. And once you have automated something, your marginal cost drops to zero. So doing something once, that first time you do it, that first time you've written the script or pulled together things in a tool that you can then push the button, there's a big cost associated with coding that up, with buying that tool, with putting that defense in place. But then the next unit and the next unit and the next unit are free, which is when you think about botnets or things that are highly distributed, marginal cost becomes something that you want to take into consideration. Okay, economics. Okay, so a little bit about game theory. Game theory is actually a branch of math, and it studies decisions made by players who are interacting and where the decision that one participant makes affects the payoff that the other can expect. So the costs and the benefits of me playing a game with you, my benefit depends on your choice just as much as it depends on mine. And we see this framework for evaluating how decisions get made applied to many topics. Security could be one. Business and negotiation tends to be another place where this is quite popular as a framework for figuring out what should be done. And this is basically, when you set up a scenario as a game, this is how you might describe it. You have player one, they have choice A and B. Player two has choice A and B. And this is a symmetric game that I've set up here, but player two could have a choice of C or D. It doesn't have to be the same choices that player one has. Player two could have different choices. But the idea is that if player one chooses A, then they are either going to experience a payoff in this box or this box, depending on whether player two chooses this or this. So some problems that get, another way of describing how games are played is a decision tree. And so in this, what I've set up is that player A has a move, and then based on the move that player A has, B may make a move, and then A may move again, and finally you have some sort of result and payoffs that either have. And when you are in the beginning of the game, you kind of want to have your eye to what the expected value is at the end of the game, and it will affect the choices that you make because you want to maximize your utility. You want to maximize what you get out of the exchange, whether the end result is a cost that you want to minimize or whether the end result is a gain that you want even bigger. So a couple of classic games include chicken. Anyone ever played chicken? What's the concept of chicken? Seriously, what's the concept of chicken?
Make your opponent blow and quit.
Right, make your opponent quit. So I'm in a car, you're in a car. The first one to swerve loses their car. I'm looking at you right in the eye. And what does this depend on? What would make you decide to swerve? You don't want to die, right? And this becomes important later. And I'll swerve if I think you won't. Credible commitment. My decision not just depends on what the payout is, but how much I believe that you're crazy and you are not gonna. You're gonna rip out the steering wheel. Credible commitment. This is where some of the behavioral economics sort of gets involved with things like this. But the idea with chicken and brinkmanship, this is kind of like mutually assured destruction. The primary motivator is that the end result, if the two players don't figure out a way to cooperate, the final result is so bad that folks would do anything to avoid it. Okay, a volunteer's dilemma is a slightly different problem. It's this idea that that you have a group of folks, one people has to take on the cost for everyone else to achieve the benefit. But no one really wants to bear the cost. No one wants to be the one to sort of step forward, pay the tax or what have you. So everyone has an incentive to be kind of a free rider and wait it out and see if someone will volunteer. Tragedy of the commons is kind of the reverse of that. There's a common good that we can all enjoy if we cooperate and consume it at a certain level, but everyone is kind of, but if one person cheats, then they get some additional benefit that they didn't necessarily pay for. However, if everyone cheats, then the resource is depleted and no one gets anything. And then the most classic game is Prisoner's Dilemma. Have any of you heard of John Nash, Beautiful Mind? Okay, so he came up with some ideas that he applied to Prisoner's Dilemma that ended up bringing game theory and negotiation theory to the next level. It's basically like this. Two of you committed a crime. And you both colluded, you were in on it together, but I've got you in separate cells. And now you have a choice. You can either confess or you can plead not guilty. And the best situation here, if you kind of look at these, the best situation is that you both keep quiet, because then I won't really have anything to go on, and maybe you serve a week or a month, but basically you avoid the pain. If one of you confesses, though, the other loses big time. You confess, you say, "Yep, I'm gonna testify against my buddy. We hacked that site together, but he did all the hard work." And the other person says, "I'm innocent." The person who says they're innocent will lose out a lot. The person who confesses will win. I may have that written backwards, but I think you know what I mean. And then the last scenario is that both folks confess, in which case they both have sort of a medium price to pay. And we have to figure out what would a rational person do in this situation. So there's a couple of different things that go into calculating what is the optimal solution. What is equilibrium? One is cooperation. There's usually in most of these games, there is a benefit to cooperation, but there is a lack of information about what the other participant is going to do. And oftentimes, although the best for the greater good result is to cooperate, an individual may have an incentive to cheat or to defect. And so there's always that's the tension of games and game theory, is that while overall the best, most happiest conclusion is that folks cooperate, there's always a little twist that gives individuals the incentive to defect. And this pushes this tension and this balancing of potential payouts leads to some strategies dominating others, meaning it makes more sense for me to cheat because my payout, my expected payout is bigger, even if I know that cooperating would be the best for all participants. And oftentimes games will have an equilibrium. Unfortunately, some games have more than one equilibrium. That can be kind of a pain. But equilibrium is when no participant can increase the expected value of their payout by changing their own strategy. So if we look at prisoners, and basically that is Nash equilibrium. So the optimist says that neither side can improve its strategy or improve its payout independently. Based on their own decisions. That's equilibrium. The pessimist says they'll lose more if they deviate from the optimal strategy. And so the way that this works out in Prisoner's Dilemma is that although the best overall outcome is for folks to mutually cooperate, people look and they think, I could go free if only I confess. Right? And so both player one and player two are thinking, man, if I cooperate and the other confesses, I lose out big time. And if they don't confess and I confess, I'm out. And so they perversely, they're both driven to confess, and then they get the medium punishment when they could have gotten the really light punishment. They were tempted by the thought that they would go free, or the fear that they would be the good guy and they'd get hung out to dry. So, okay. So these are some very abstract problems, although perhaps we can think of situations in which they'd be in which they would be applied. So let's see if there's some information security or risk-related scenarios that we could layer these on, and figure out what is the game that we're playing. So this, I admit I forced it a little bit, but give me feedback. Maybe there's a way that I can prove this. So tragedy of the commons. Spam and bandwidth fusion are often used as examples of tragedy of the commons because the individual's choice leads them to engage in activities that deteriorate the experience for all. So with spam, it's I want to send spam. I want to send 11 billion spam messages out because if I get a 0.001% response rate for my pharmaceuticals, then I experience a financial gain, and my marginal cost of sending out more spam is 0. So even though I know that I ruin the internet, if everybody is sending out spam, no one gets to enjoy email, I'm willing to choke other folks' email servers in my haste to get those spam messages out because I want to have that social benefit without the cost. Same thing with other situations where it is a common resource pool that folks are looking for. There's often incentives to encourage overuse, and so equilibrium ends up being a situation where resources depleted unless there is some external factor that forces folks to play nice, like legislation or different technology that changes the payoffs. Okay, and so thus in tragedy of the commons, folks are perversely encouraged to deplete resources. And then I was trying to find something that would be akin to chicken, which is also called brinkmanship, or hawk dove. And the best that I could come up with is with vulnerability disclosure, in the sense that I think vulnerability researchers have two choices how they can play the game. They can play nice, cooperate, and report vulnerabilities responsibly, or they can exploit vulnerabilities they've found, weaponize their code, and release it to the free market and just let, chaos be their guide. Whereas asset owners or software creators have choices of what they can do too. They can acknowledge vulnerabilities, and they can cooperate in the sense that, let's resolve these issues together, or they can ignore, deny, or stall, let's say. And so I think that this is my kind of guess at payoff, and this is not meant to suggest that there is zero benefit, more that this is probably the best situation, responsible disclosure and acknowledgement, whatever level of acknowledgement is acceptable, versus situations where there's stalling that goes on, or exploitation that might actually impact not just the asset owner or the reputation of the vulnerability researcher, but others. What do you guys think? Can you think of any other examples of chicken or brinkmanship that we see? Yeah?
How about a product manager and their customers? So more stable code versus one.
Okay, so like releasing code? Releasing code is a game of chicken?
Rugged code versus loose code with lots of bugs.
Okay, all right. Okay, yeah. I'll see if I can sort of twist that and figure out what the payoffs will be. Because the benefit for the product manager of not additional testing would be, say, quicker time to market, but they've actually brought something that's buggy quicker to market. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Okay, and then volunteer's dilemma. I was also trying to figure out what would be comparable, and so I actually came up with data breach cost information, because everyone wants it, but no one wants to step forward and share, we suffered a breach that was yay big, and these were all the costs associated with remediating it. There's not a competitive advantage to sharing that information. It could actually have a cost as far as reputation. But everyone wants to know, right? Because everyone wants to sort of have comparable information to go off of. So I thought that this was indicative of volunteer's dilemma. Okay, so that's enough of that. That's enough of some examples of game theory. Basically, though, how one wins the game is to clarify what the dominant strategy is and figure out what equilibrium is. That is how that is, if you are a rational participant, how one approaches games that can be constructed as game theory. You maximize your utility. However, there's another option, which is if you have the ability, maybe you can do things to actually change the payoffs. And that way, the incentives that were so perversely leading your competitors into defection or non-cooperation, maybe you yourself can help change the rules of the game or the payoffs of the game so that cooperation is actually what is encouraged as opposed to perverse competition or defection. So we're in information security. What moves do we have? Show me your moves. And I think that actually the concept of a repeated, basically security, we can think of as layers of repeated games. For every move, there's a counter move, and so these are some of the things that we have in our toolkit. We have things like reputation requirements for participating in a system, whether that's a verified identity or that it's related to, say, role-based access control. That is one of the things that or a reverse of that would be a reputation requirement might be, I'm going to use a double negative here, not being a signature that we know of as bad. Or I can make not a double negative out of it. Your participation requires on you behaving in a signature that matches a known good pattern. Okay, I'll come back to that one. Incremental authentication, content-based filtering, whitelisting, blacklisting, rate limiting, things that check to see that there's a human behind the keyboard, like CAPTCHA, or encryption. Can anyone else think of any other information security controls that we have? I've tried to generalize them, but seriously. If you think about antivirus software, let's say, I would say that that's content or context-based filtering to a certain level, access control and authentication. Firewalls could be a combination of blacklisting, whitelisting, rate limiting. What's up?
Behavior-based activity.
Behavior-based activity, definitely. And there can be good activity, bad activity, and just weird activity, right?
Consistent versus inconsistent.
Consistent versus inconsistent. Okay, cool. Anyone else? What's your favorite tool? Testing. Okay, that's a good one. Finding vulnerabilities before someone else does. Okay, cool. I'll add those in. And we know that for every move, there's a counter move. So we have this set of controls, and we can layer them into a system depending on how we think attackers are going to come at us, right? And if we think attackers are persistent, we can just add more and more layers, right? Okay, so how much is enough? Sort of come back to that question, how much security is enough? How many games are we going to set up until we're satisfied that we have created enough friction or put incentives or disincentives in place to encourage the behavior we want and discourage the behavior we don't want? Well, the amount of friction that we put in is going to depend on a lot of things. It's going to depend on the payouts, meaning there's assets that we're trying to protect. So what is the value of those assets? I'm not going to put in 12,000 feet worth of deep layers of information security controls to protect something that I don't value. I'm going to save the big guns for the big assets. However, I also have to keep in mind what the payout is for the attacker, because the attacker there's some assets that are going to be juicier for an attacker, And there are some things that that attacker is going to value maybe more than I do. So I need to take that into consideration. And how many attackers do I expect? Is this going to be a constant thing? Am I going to have to fend folks off every day? Or is this, that horrible event, mutually assured destruction type event that could blow my company to pieces? So there's those types of things that I have to keep in consideration, and then sort of set up the game appropriately and see how it works. Now it's time to play. Except, does this sound familiar to anyone? It sounds, let's look at this again. The value of the asset to the owner, the value of the asset to potential attackers, how much of the attacks must be averted, and the strength of the controls I can put in place. Kind of like chicken, but actually I'm just being mean because I'm a risk wonk. So actually just risk rolled you, because I basically just, and by the way I just coined the phrase risk rolled you, because even though this is a game theoretic construct that I'm sort of exploring with you guys, it's basically another form factor for risk management. And so some of the things start to sound familiar. What are the payoffs? What are the values? What are the values of the assets? How much does it cost to put things in place for you? And then what's the preventative value of it for the attacker? So essentially, and it makes sense, because as we described before, game theory is basically a framework for evaluating how participants who are competing are going to make decisions based on the rules of the game. And risk management is essentially an extension of decision management. So this all actually kind of makes sense. However, when designing risk management programs, I'll just repeat what I'm about to say. Risk management, there may be some risks that don't have a competitive element to them, where games do, if that makes sense. Okay, and defenders essentially, what a defense is in information security is there's a choice at a given point. Am I going to give this person access? Am I going to allow this event to go through? Is this content good or bad? Each of those is a decision, and then there will be an action and a reaction. And in modern and sophisticated risk systems, those actions happen in real time. So, and that is essentially that you see sort of you can kind of watch the battles happening from your battle station as you see how automated decisioning that you've set up either repels or is pushed through by attackers. That sounded kind of romantic, actually. Okay, so, and I'm just going to touch briefly on sort of the automation aspect of this so I work at Tagged. Tagged is a social network game platform with a lot of users. And my primary responsibility is actually around protecting our customers from external threats. I'm responsible for protecting our site, but I'm actually really concerned with how to protect users. And so I'm not just watching our perimeter, I'm watching what's happening on our platform. And there's only so much of my attention to go around, and so therefore a lot of these things have to be automated. And every event is interesting. Every event could be a move in a game. And so each one is watched, and we make decisions about each one of them, and we do that by automating the decision process by applying behavioral analytics. And whether it is that we're looking for a signature of something good or bad, or whether we're just looking for something that is normal versus aberrant, what we are doing is we are evaluating an attempted event, whether it's a wink or a click or content in a message. We're evaluating an attempted action, and then we make some kind of decision about how we want to handle it. And of course, in most of the cases, they just go through. Easy peasy, because it's good. But when it's not good, then if we decide it's not good, then we may need to do something else. Okay, so not all risk decisions have a competitive element, but all competition has risks. So let's give it a go, shall we? Can you guys read this? Okay, so I have set up a little bit of a move counter move, and I've set it up this way because if I had tried to do a decision tree, it would have extended out to here, and I knew the projector wouldn't work like that, so we're just going to do it this way, and you can take my word for it that this could make a really cool tree because things will loop back and connect to different places, just like chutes and ladders. So here we go. So let's say our attacker is, let's just vote, is our attacker a spammer, credit card thief? Spammer, thank you. All right, okay, so our spammer sets up an account using a fake identity. Okay, so we might ask them to go through a verification process, email verification. Has anyone ever set up a site, an account on a website? Has anyone set up an account on a website in the last year or two where you haven't had to go through email verification? It's pretty common. It's like table stakes now. Okay, so you go through email verification. If I'm an attacker, what do I want to do about that? I'm going to script it. I'm only going to do that once ever, email verification. Then I'm going to automate it so that I don't ever have to do it again. Okay, so I see the verification is complete. Maybe I want to make sure it's not a script, because I know that scripting is a really common way of getting through email verification. So I might test for a human behind the CAPTCHA. So how does everybody like CAPTCHAs? Good, strong, bot-preventing technology? Annoying, and Mechanical Turk. Right? So that's easy. Just outsource. If I'm the attacker now, I'm going to outsource the CAPTCHA. Okay, they're testing for a human. I'm going to find the cheapest humans, and all they're going to do all day is they're going to review CAPTCHAs for me. Maybe I'm paying them. Maybe I'm rewarding them with access to some material that they would like to have for free. Either way, I'm outsourcing. Okay, all right. I see you. You're outsourced CAPTCHA, and I raise you. You can only do that from a few IPs at a time because I'm going to rate limit by IP address. Or sorry, I'm going to rate limit by device ID. In this case, I'm going to use, cookie or flash cookie, nothing necessarily super fancy because, I'm going to have to do this a lot every day, so I want a cheap solution. Rate limit by device ID. Okay, I'm going to create a bunch of different virtual machines on my computer, and they will all show up with different cookies. Haha. Oh, okay, well then I'm going to rate limit by IP. And if I'm super fancy, maybe I'll do some geolocation on IP, and I will actually rate limit you by location too. I'll just slow you down if I see you coming from a lot of things. I'm feeling a little split personality here, but back to the attacker side. Okay, so now I can only use this IP a few times, but I've got my virtualized system set up so I can just throw out, I can have new device looking things. Maybe what I'll do is I'll actually distribute using a dynamic proxy or a botnet. So I can do that. That's easy. Okay. Well, now a lot of the really basic identity stuff that a defender can do is done. It's been done, and this entity, this attacker, has already gotten through those. So now I have to do things like behavioral analytics and look for similarities across accounts. How many Cindy W's do I think are going to sign up for an account in one day? Okay, so if the accounts are very similar, then what might an attacker do? They might actually figure out a way to randomize. Maybe they figure it out themselves, like they pull from a book of baby names, or they pull from white pages, or maybe they scrape other sites and find actual real people that they then put their information and sort of inject it back into my registration process. Okay, well in that case, maybe then what I need to do is I need you to kind of do some time, like do some activities so that I know that you're normal, that you have good intent, because I can't tell based on your identity alone whether you're good or bad, because you could be you, or you could be him is pretending to be you. So I don't know if you're really you, so instead maybe I'm just going to wait and see and allow you to engage in some behavior, and then I will know for once and for all whether you're good or bad. Okay, so then you, or actually not you, him, because he's the one who signed up with your identity, is going to age the account. And maybe he'll post in a forum as you, Or maybe he'll send some love or winks to someone to just kind of, you know, I'll be off my guard then when he comes back and reactivates the account. And he was a spammer, right? So now he's going to start sending messages. Okay, well, I can look at those messages. I can filter, because what do spammers do? Well, they usually send you links to sites that then sell you stuff, or ask you to enter your mother's maiden name because you won the lottery. So maybe I can actually kind of do some content filtering. And if you are risky, then I will ask you to go through some additional authentication to prove that you are who you say you are, which is him. In which case, now you're stuck because you really want to send that spam. So you are going to steal some credentials to feed to me so that I think that you actually are him. And now I'm stuck because I've run out of automated things I can do. So I'm going to ask you for something that would require some manual verification, like your phone number so I can call you, or your address so I can mail you something in the mail. And now the sad face, right? Because this is getting really lame, and all you want to do is send out spam, and all I want you to do is not send out spam. So, and you know, let's say you figure out a way to give me, I don't know, his driver's license and his mother's maiden name, since you got him to click on your page from a different site. You already have that information. And then I'll have to have a person then figure out whether this is good or bad. This takes a long time. And you know what? This is expensive. Now it's expensive for both sides. So, but tell me, you guys are security pros. What do you think are the biggest cost drivers in here? Let's be the attacker first. What is most expensive for the attacker? Yeah, that bothers me. That bothers me because I am not a fan of CAPTCHA, and so when I was going through this, I was like, wow, that's actually something that they have to pay for. And so maybe I should be using it much more, because it really, you know, it really annoys them. What else? Botnet, renting a botnet. Unless they have their own, or they, you know, if they have, maybe they have free access to something that a really good dynamic proxy service. Are they paying for time on a botnet? Interesting. That's a place where there's some cost. And well, if they are using proxies, then maybe I should have a list of proxy locations too. Of course I do, it's just not on here. Okay, so the other thing that is really, I think, expensive is if they would need to defraud a verification process that actually ties to something that's real world, because it suggests that there's a manual component. Whether the manual component is getting on a Skype chat, or sending someone to go steal mail out of someone's mailbox, there's this weird manual component that I think might be a cost driver. Okay, now as the defender, what are my cost drivers? Okay, silence. One of my cost drivers here is looking at similarities across accounts. That is some actual serious analytics. And if it needs to be automated, those are people who need to be coding that up. So that is a cost driver. And if I'm not having people code it up, I'm having to buy tools to do it. Actually, requiring reputation level to proceed, that also has a cost. But it's kind of a hidden one, in the sense that if I require my users to have a certain reputation before I let them do things they want to do, then that's costing me, because I actually want to incent my good users to do stuff. It's the bad users who I want to disincent. And anywhere where it says manual, huge cost. Huge cost, because I can't outsource via Mechanical Turk or encouraging people to fill things out so they can get access to content that they want for free. Okay, and so, all right. So we're almost done. That I set this up. I can set this up, I can A/B test the heck out of it to figure out which controls actually cause the most drop off for bad guys versus good guys. I can analytically do a ton of that. But there's one other thing, And that other thing is that this isn't just us versus the attackers. There's users, and I am on a platform, I'm on a social platform, so I have customers, but you all might have employees in your system, or folks who have a legitimate need to do these things and have access to these resources that the attackers also want access to. And so that also needs to be factored in. How much friction can your good users take when you're designing a system? But all the other things still apply. You can still set up the gamut and then run folks through it to figure out which ones are the most effective. It's just you want to keep an eye on this cost as well. Okay. And then back to risk rolling you, because this is a really common thing in doing risk management, especially quantitative risk management, that you have to manage is your false positives and your false negatives. So your false positives are when your good folks can't do things and maybe leave your site and go to your competitor because something that they were trying to do couldn't get through, versus a false negative, which is when the bad guys are able to get through the traps that you've laid for them. And then this one is interesting. Sometimes you can make correct decisions about what to do, and there's still a cost. For example, if you correctly figure out that one of your customers has had their credit card stolen, there's still a cost, and it's a bad experience associated with stopping someone's account and getting them restoring their access to it. It's not fun, but it's a teachable moment, and factor it into the game. Okay, so then I think I have 5 minutes left. So game over. Really? Is that it? No, there's one more thing. There's just one more thing that I wanted to mention, which is that, okay, we have a very rigorous framework that we set up. We're using economics and game theory, which is a branch of applied math, and we can collect lots of data and have statistics, and we can optimize the heck out of these systems. But we need to consider also that that a lot of economics depends on folks being rational in how they maximize their utility. And however, and that's what should happen, but it's not always what does happen. And so a quick little game. Are you guys up for a quick little game? Yes. Okay, so the quick little game is the ultimatum game. You, sir, I'm going to give $100. And you have to split it with this gentleman right here. And he gets to choose whether he will accept the split. And if he accepts the split, then you split the money. Hooray. If he does not accept, you both get 0. Tell me, economically rational folks, what should he accept? $1, $2, $3, 30 cents. So if you're playing this game, would you accept $1? You know that he's going to get 99. He could choose to split this however he wants. How about $1,000 he gets? You get $1. No, you don't like it. You want more. So if I give him 99 bucks, really, you'd reject the $1 and have both of you goose egg?
Yeah.
Okay. Just show of hands, how many of you would accept $1? Economically rational, love you guys. How many would accept 20 bucks? How many would only accept it if he gave you 75? Honest, mean people. But honest, because actually, in most of the times when this is actually set up as an experiment, you have a question?
Of course, you have commented on that, depend upon repetition of the game. If I think the game's going to happen a second time, I want a higher cut. It's going to encourage us to give me more money. If it's never going to happen once, I'll think about it.
Interestingly, when this is set up as a single play game, and this is something that if we had more time we could talk about a little bit more. Now I've got what, 2 minutes? I'm over time? I'm okay? Okay. If we could, repetitious games are really interesting because the strategy you can set up strategies that essentially encourage long-term competition or cooperation, Whereas when the horizons of the games are shorter or known, people are still encouraged to defect. So all over the world, when experimenters have run this game, most of the time it ends up being way closer to 50-50 than the 99-1. And interestingly, it actually doesn't matter the income level of the participants. So in folks where the average income is much lower and where they're much higher and they might be able to absorb this in a different way, it really doesn't matter. Player Bs usually reject if offered less than 30%. And they've actually, because they're scientific experiments, they were actually checking brain activity. And of course, the reason why that you wouldn't accept $1 is because that's not fair. That's not cool. And actually, the center of your brain that gets activated is one where revulsion and disgust are experienced. Whereas if it was a fair offer, then it's more like, you're thinking, the thinking part of your brain, cognitive. And that's because there's this very real driver of fairness, fear, and punishment associated with decision making about things that basically, I walked into the room, my expected value was 0. If someone offers me $1, I'm up. But not so much. So, okay, so in any case, this is actually the wrap-up slide, hooray. So the wrap-up from the quick, bite-sized piece of behavioral economics is that attackers and defenders have bias. And we already know that affects our ability to estimate the value of assets, the value of payoffs. It means that we often overestimate or underestimate the capabilities of the folks who we're playing games with. However, a lot of these conceptual models are useful when you're trying to design defenses. It's just that you need to temper them with your actual experience. So to be effective in playing the game, you need to be able to change. I think the most effective way to do this is to kind of change the game. And the way you change the game is you manipulate the payoffs and the costs associated with activities that you want or don't want on the system. And I also believe, although I don't have proof of this yet, is that things like game theory are going to be most useful when you have low risk, high frequency activities, kind of like the thing that I was showing you, point counterpoint, because if they're high frequency, you can actually put assumptions in test mode and figure out which controls work better and don't work as well, and you can optimize based on that. And then also game theory is useful in high risk, low frequency interactions because it's kind of, you're thinking about your strategy before you have to play the game. And also game theory is really useful in negotiation. And so if this is a really big problem, there may be a way to kind of negotiate or set yourself up for more success or less loss, depending on just some of the dynamics you're able to observe and manipulate. And of course, just remember all of the players in the game and whose team you're on. So my users and I are one team, and attackers are on the other, and we are doing our best to do battle. Anyway, that is all I've got. Do you have any questions? Yes.
How much effort do you put in understanding the payoff?
Good question. I actually don't put that much effort into understanding the payoff unless it's financial and very obvious. Instead, I use as a proxy for benefit the cost or sophistication of the attack, because I assume that someone will not invest a lot of time and effort and outsource captchas and stuff, and unless their return is higher than than what they're spending to carry out an attack. Yes.
Don't like a billion startups all over disagree with that whole concept though? Like we constantly throw money at things that aren't rational because we want something and think that eventually if we throw enough money at it, then we'll give it over back or benefit whatever profit provides.
Where do you work?
I've worked for very good networks.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I was, okay.
Company with a security problem.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have not worked for a lot of folks who can afford to throw a lot of money at things that they don't think will work. And I've had to put I've had to put a lot of effort into justifying investment in new technologies. So that's kind of a dream problem. That sounds like what do you want to play with today as far as technology. So
I don't think I understood the answer.
just because there are startups that are selling the dream doesn't necessarily mean there are buyers who can afford to pay for it.
No, I'm talking about the thinking of attackers as rational actors, that they won't keep chasing problems if it becomes increasingly costly. Because I feel like for every system you're protecting, there's some actor out there who's getting access to it is priceless.
That's right. So not all attackers value the asset that they're going after in the same way. And so at some point you have to recognize that there is some portion of activity that you cannot defer. You're going to have to take on the expense associated with successful attacks. Yeah.
It seems to me, and I think this is where you were going, your example of splitting the money actually proved how irrational people are. The rational thing would be to accept anything other than zero.
Right.
Because that